As I said, we're going to kick off now in terms of me giving you an overview of the course, what the course outcomes are, and then later on, Michelle will kindly give you an idea from her perspective as a former student of the program, what it was like going through the program and the benefits of the same. And then we have some room for Q&A, so hold on to any questions that you may have for Michelle and myself. Thank you very much. So in terms of, why you would like to do this particular program, and especially with DCU Business School. So DCU Business School, as you might know, has been known to be the University of Enterprise here in Ireland. It's a university that has very strong connections with industry, something that we are very proud of. And which also means that we are very much focused on having students basically who are engaging in evidence-based, decision making in the workplace, who have, the most recent research inform the decision-making abilities in the workplace, and who translate the knowledge that they gain here in DCU Business School in the workplaces. DCU as Business School has also been ranked among the top 90 business schools in Europe in the Financial Times ranking 2024, one of the 3 Irish business schools to achieve this ranking. And we are very proud of the fact that we hold the Triple Crown accreditation, which means we have been accredited by AACSB, AMBA, as well as ACWIS. And what that means, it's basically a quality stamp, right? It means that it places us among the top 1% of business schools worldwide, and that we basically are a global leader when it comes to academic quality, research, and industry engagement. And we're the only business school in Ireland to also hold the Small Business Charter Award. With regards to the program that you are interested in, the MSc in Work and Organisational Psychology and Behaviour, this is actually the longest running program of its kind in Ireland. It was established in the 90s and has been running since, and it's very popular. As a result of its long running, we have a very strong faculty of very, accomplished researchers, speakers, also individuals who are strongly tied, to industry, basically delivering on this particular program. And we have been refining it year after year in order to ensure that what we are delivering is really cutting edge and that we really adhere to also relevant topics, such as, for example, the future of work, AI, and so on. The program is very popular, I have to say. We used to run it in the past every 2 years, and now we're running it on an annual basis. So it's a program that has been accredited by both CIPD as well as PSI, and therefore has these particular sort of quality stamps as well. If you are interested in the course and you're looking at the web page for this particular course, the MSc in Work and Organisational Psychology, as well as Behaviour, I have to very clearly articulate that it is very important to recognize that we have 2 separate streams, right? And these 2 separate streams come with different program codes. So for those of you who have a psychology background, basically an undergraduate degree in psychology, level 8 honors degree, you would be going for DC 508, which is the psychology stream. Whereas individuals who have, a level 8 honors degree, H2.1 or higher in any other discipline would be applying for DC 957, which is the organizational behavior stream. So in reality, those 2 streams are not really different, So our students who sign up for these courses basically are mixed together in class, and that's very important for us, actually, for us to have this particular diversity in terms of individuals' backgrounds, education, industry experience, various different types of roles that they have held to date and also will be holding in the future. And they are basically being taught together, but at the same time, we have to, on paper, treat them differently because basically the accreditation bodies require us to do so. So the only reason why we have basically these two different programs and respective titles is for professional accreditation reasons, such that the Psychological Society of Ireland does not allow us to have students, for example, on a master's with a psychology title unless they have a recognized undergraduate degree or a conversion course, for example, in psychology. Um, for those of you who basically go with the other stream, the organizational behavior stream, as I said, you have the exact same experience. You're mingled in class with the psychology students and the same benefits from the particular course, except that by the end of your graduation, you will not be able to register with the Psychological Society of Ireland. But that's the only difference, whereas you can go down, for example, the CIPD membership route and so on. For both programs, I should say we are looking for work experience. This is a part-time program. So the idea is that the students who come into this particular program have, on average, at least 5 years of work experience or more. This work experience is really needed because the way the program is structured and delivered, we're really building on that type of work experience for assessments and assignments. And we only allow a very small number of individuals with less than 5 years of work experience into the program. And those are usually students who, for example, have, a very strong academic, background. Okay, in terms of the course structure, just to give you a flavor of the 2-year part-time programs. So year one is the year in which we try to give you a very strong foundation in organizational psychology. So here we kick off with the organizational psychology module that's delivered by Professor Isolt Freeney, an organizational psychologist and full professor here in DCU Business School. And you can see it's 10 ECTS credits worth, meaning that it's quite heavily weighted. So she would be covering topics such as, for example, the nature of work, motivational job design, employee well-being, decision-making in organizations, hybrid working, and the future of work, for example, more broadly. In the same sort of year one, semester one, you would have another module that's heavily weighted, and that's the strategy, organization, innovation module that's delivered by my dear colleague, Malcolm Brady. Malcolm Brady has a background in strategic management. And the reason why we have such a strong focus on this particular module is that while it's great for you, for example, to boost employee engagement and introduce maybe, for example, job crafting within your immediate team, it is important that the things that you do, more broadly align with the organization's vision, mission, and goals. So basically with the strategy. And so this module introduces students to different types of management theories. It examines the relationship between strategy, organizational structures, and the role of innovation in driving and shaping organizational strategy. And Malcolm also does a fantastic simulation exercise as part of this particular module. Now, in year one, semester two, you have two particular modules. One, again, is strongly weighted, which is the leadership and change module that Professor Patrick Fullard, our full professor in organizational behavior, and myself would be jointly delivering. So here on the leadership part of the module, which I would deliver, you would be learning about different types of leadership styles, the effectiveness of those leadership styles. You would be zooming in on learning about, for example, particular leadership techniques, such as, for example, how to become more charismatic as a leader. We would be also looking at leadership and well-being, which can often be a challenge, not just in terms of looking after the well-being of your employees, but also your own well-being as a leader. And then with Patrick, you would be looking at topics such as, for example, navigating power and politics in organizations, managing top management teams, future of work again, and more broadly, for example, managing and leading organizational change. The other module then is already in preparation of your dissertation. That is going to be sort of, the finishing touch to the program. So here you have a module on research methods that's currently being delivered by my dear colleague, Dr. Neve Dali. She's also a former graduate of this particular program. And yeah, decided to have a career in academia. And she is delivering on this particular module where you would be learning about different types of research methods that you might want to consider for, investigating a particular topic of interest for your dissertation, whether that's qualitative, quantitative, and so on. And what is really nice is at the end of this research methods module, you would actually have a lovely poster session where, similar to being at a conference, you would be presenting your own research ideas for your dissertation to an engaged audience. These would usually include other students as well as staff members on the program. Then for Year two is going to be a bit more applied. So in year two, semester one, you would have a module on learning and development with Finian Buckley, who is a full professor in organizational psychology here at DCU Business School and who looks and leads our executive education. So you would be learning about different types of learning theories. You would be working on a tender proposal in a group. And it's a really engaging module. Then we have my dear colleague, Professor Lisa van der Werf, who delivers a relatively new introduced module on trust and relationships. Lisa, I should say, is the president of FINT, which is an international network of leading trust scholars in the world. And she brings that particular knowledge and her own research also in the field of trust and working relationships to this particular module, which is very popular among students. In the same module, you would also be learning about selection and assessment, which is an important part of organizational psychology. It's an understanding of, the importance of psychological tests, for example, in hiring, in recruitment, to have an understanding of the same and the process. And this is a module that's delivered by my dear colleague, Dr. Paolo Jaranon, at the moment, who's an assistant prof in organizational psychology. And then the second semester of year two focuses on two particular modules that are of a very applied nature. One is coaching and mentoring, where you will be getting an exposure to, coaching more broadly, different types of coaching models. You will have an understanding of the theory that's informing, for example, coaching and mentoring. And you would also be engaging in some skills building and trying out coaching skills in a psychological, safe environment with other peers. So basically, we're talking here about one-on-one peer coaching. The other module that's delivered by my dear colleague, Professor Claire Gubbins, is on practicing organizational psychology. So here you would really deep dive in terms of applying that knowledge. And she also does like a very brilliant role play, which allows you to put your knowledge to practice. Now, psychometrics and analytics is another module that would be taking up some time in year two of the particular course. The thing is that basically the Psychological Society of Ireland requires that our students get an exposure and training in psychometrics, and that's delivered by an outside provider. And you will be basically taking part in what we call a test user ability training. And you have to pass this particular training. And if you like, then at a future point in time, you can build on that particular qualification. In addition to that, the module itself is called Psychometrics and Analytics. My colleague, Neve Dali, who I've just mentioned before in the context of research methods, would also, for example, give you some additional training in terms of how to analyze your dissertation data. By then, you would have completed your ethics form. You would have been, collecting data, whether it's, for example, interview data, survey data, and so on. And you will be given supports from us through Neve in form of how to analyze this particular data. And last but not least, we are making some room, particularly in year two, semester two, for your dissertations. As I mentioned, you can choose a topic of your choice, something that you are interested in. And those topics range a lot from high performing, work teams to people looking at, for example, authentic leadership, hybrid working, return to the office mandates and how that is perceived, for example, by employees, to, for example, the question of menopause in the workplace. So, whatever it is that you're interested in, you can pursue for your dissertation. And we are trying our best to assign a supervisor by the end of year one. In terms of a good match between what it is that you want to do and the supervisor's expertise. And they are going to guide you for a year then in terms of providing input and supporting you with your dissertation, with the dissertation typically being submitted in early June. So in terms of meeting the team, I actually have two slides here. So I have mentioned a few of these names already. We have an amazing, amazing team of colleagues delivering on the program. They are an absolute pleasure to work with. Very dedicated individuals who love teaching. And I think that passion, at least from my point of view, really comes across. Let's hear what Michelle is going to say later on. I put myself first just for the fact that I'm the program chair, but as I mentioned, I'm a full professor in work and organizational psychology and behavior, with particular foci of mine being on women in leadership as well-being in organizations. I mentioned Professor Finian Buckley already, who teaches the learning and development module, because this is really his particular expertise, which he nicely puts to practice, as I was saying, because he is the lead when it comes to executive education courses here in DCU Business School. Professor Isolde Freeney, also a full prof in the same field, does a lot of work on employee well-being and also more recently on career transitions. Dr. Malcolm Brady is our associate prof in strategy. As I said, he's looking after the strategy, organization, and innovation module. And then we have Professor Patrick Flood, who is a full professor in organizational behavior. It does a good bit of work on leadership and top management teams. Neve Daly, as I said, is our assistant prof in organizational psychology and HRM with particular interest in the topic of trust. Also, Paolo Yaranon has joined us recently. He works on topics such as employee well-being, workplace incivility, and as I said, he is delivering on the selection and assessment module of the program. My dear colleague, Professor Lisa van der Werf, who is a former program chair, also is a professor in organizational psychology. She has a very strong grounding in research methods and does a lot of research on the topic of trust. As I mentioned, she is the current president of FIND, which is, a leading association of researchers in this particular field of research. And then Professor Claire Gubbins, who's a professor in HRM and organizational behavior, who does quite a bit of work in, social networks and L&D. Yes, so that's the team. As I said, all of us are very research active. All of us also consult and do projects with industry, teach also executive education, and all of us are involved in various ways. Lisa, as I said, with FIND. Isolde Freeney, my dear colleague, used to be the PSI chair and also the program chair of this particular program for a while. And myself, for example, I served close to 5 years on the executive committee of the European Association of Work and Organisational Psychology, which is basically, the organization when it comes to work and organizational psychology at European level. So all of us are involved and do our best to produce cutting edge research, working at the forefront of policy making, being involved with industry, and bringing all of that back into the classroom. The course itself, what I should mention is what we adopt is an adult learning model, right? We see ourselves as responsible adults who are responsible for our own learning, and we see ourselves as a group in form of a learning community. So the idea is really we do learn from each other. You learn from us, but we also learn from you, and that's the beauty about it. And in order to make that possible, we need you to come to class. So we are back to in-person classes. During COVID-19, yes, we had courses online, but as a necessity. We found that those in-person classes are exceptionally valued in terms of you making time for those classes, also being able to switch off from your day-to-day, work commitments, responsibilities. And it's really important in terms of networking. So that's why we're stressing this, because you're going to be part of an amazing community of diverse, very talented individuals who come, as I said, from very different work roles, industries, and so on. So the time even in between the classes is so valuable in terms of just chatting to each other, going jointly for coffee, and so on. So come to class, use your voice, share your experiences, listen, and support your team. There's a lot of reading involved, so I have to give you a heads up there, which means that as you come maybe to the first one or two modules, so particularly semester one, some of you might find it a little bit challenging to get the hang of reading academic articles, right? We're not dealing just with simple textbooks. What we want you to be exposed to the state of art of research, which is underpinning, as I was saying earlier, evidence-based logic and decision making. And unfortunately, those research articles are not necessarily always super reader friendly, let me put it that way. It takes a while to get used to the style of writing. And sometimes these articles can be quite dense, but you'll get the hang of it, believe me, you're going to be great. In terms of assessments, the good news is there's no exams. We have continuous assessments for both individuals as well as groups. So we want you to not only have the opportunity to work on your individual assessments that give you maybe an opportunity to, for example, focus on a particular work experience of yours or a critical incident that makes sense to you, but we also want you to have the opportunity to work as a group. For example, for Finian's module on a tender proposal, because that also gives you the opportunity for, knowledge sharing, knowledge dissemination, and learning from each other. Who is the program for? As I was stressing throughout the presentation so far, as we have a diverse mix of students. So in terms of industry, we're talking tech, pharma, consultancy, education, finance, and so on. Roles, as I say, people vary in terms of industry, the organizations that they belong to, the number of years of experience, for example. And the reasons why students choose the course can vary. Some people, for example, have had a career change. It could be a change within an organization, such that you have moved, for example, from a technical role to a people management role, and you feel that you actually need to learn more about this. For example, I had a student who had a background in engineering and was the manager of two plants of a pharmaceutical company. And he basically had to manage a change process. And during the change process, he was saying, I understood quite a bit about the technical part of the change, but I felt I needed to understand more about the people management side of it. So that motivated this particular individual to pursue this course. It could be also a career change that you might decide, for example, to start your own business, become self-employed, and to use this course as an opportunity to gather, more knowledge, maybe upskill, and also widen your networks as a result of that. And then, as I said, more broadly, leading people. This is just an overview of where some of our grads currently work. It's much more diverse than that. Have a look, for example, at LinkedIn for DCU graduates of this particular program, and I'm more than happy to also put you in touch with some if you're looking for particular industries or work settings. Just to say, in terms of the course itself, we are talking here about classes that are taking place one afternoon/evening every week. So the current 2025 intake has their classes on Wednesdays from 3 to 8. If you were to join the course this starting September, you would have your classes on Tuesdays from 3 to 8. So we always have one cohort in on a Wednesday and they stick with the Wednesday for 2 years' time. As I said, the incoming cohort would start on a Tuesday from 3 to 8 and stick with that Tuesday for 2 years' time. Online learning, we have a virtual learning environment called Loop as a supplement. We are not having pure online learning, just to stress that again, because we found that in-person class experience is really critical to the success of this particular program and the benefits that are associated with it. Teamwork and assessment, I already mentioned this. We have only continuous assessment, no exams, and it's a critical method of learning. To encourage teamwork and ensure that it works, we are stressing the importance of having a learning community, the importance of you learning from each other, which means that people have to turn up for their groups, have to turn up for classes, ensure that you scope out time together to work together as a team. And this also means that we are working with team contracts that the teams have to complete at the beginning of the program, basically putting it all out there and saying, look, this is when I'm going to be busy work-wise, for example. These are my personal commitments, and to learn to basically set up norms together in terms of how to work together as a team and to manage people's various commitments and to set clear expectations around how you're going to do that. And as I said, as a result of that, those individuals stay in their teams usually for the course of the 2-year part-time program. We have amazing networks often at the end of this particular program, such that you not only have effective groups working together, but you have friendships, often friendships that last a lifetime, to the point that I've seen students invite each others for their weddings, christenings of their children, and so on. Virtual reality, just to say that we have an amazing VR lab in DCU Business School, which is being used by our lecturers in order to deliver basically to deliver top-notch teaching. So, for example, Lisa Vanderver for her trust and relationship modules would have students, for example, work on a particular relationship issue that occurred at work. And then they have to devise jointly a strategy in groups in terms of how to resolve that. And then within the VR lab, you would, for example, be meeting then that particular avatar, trying, in that session, in the VR session, to resolve that work relationship issue by, for example, communicating and interacting with that particular avatar. And it's being used also for other ways in terms of giving feedback, for example, learning about negotiations and so on. So it's a tool that we're drawing on quite a bit, and students really enjoy doing that. Just to give you a flavor of our learning environment. So this is Loop. This is basically the platform that's going to support your learning if you were to join this particular program. I've given you an example here from the Leadership and Change module that Patrick, you see his picture there, and I are jointly delivering. And basically, the way we have set up our module on Loop is such that you have basically little tiles there that if you were to click on those, they open up basically like a table of content of a book, and you can work your way through those different aspects. So we have students basically do some prep work for our modules. So before coming in every class, you are going to engage in some mandatory readings. We are going to have you engage in a discussion forum. I'll show you this in a moment. There are some optional things that you can engage in. It might be a TED talk, it might be an additional reading, or an experiential exercise. And then there are, of course, the materials for the respective session. And then we usually have some opportunity for you to engage in additional readings, especially for those students who want to deep dive into a particular topic or might consider it for the dissertation. So, for example, it could look such that you would watch an introductory video on Loop on our particular page, where we would be giving you a brief 2-minute outline of what that particular session next Tuesday, for example, is going to be about. As I said, there is some mandatory reading. We usually have students engaged in a particular, discussion forum session, which means that there is a particular question, such as, for example, um, what are best practices in terms of, for example, managing hybrid modes of working from your perspective? And students can, for example, share their experiences, and we would then be talking about that in class using evidence to underpin the same. As I said, self-assessment talks, TED talks, and so on. The class itself is going to be quite interactive. So some of the prep work might also include reading a case study that would be, for example, discussed in class, or it could be a job crafting exercise that you have to prepare in advance. And then you have a one-on-one peer coaching session with another person. And as I said, we usually finish up with a learning log. Um, in terms of the assessment, so for our particular module, it's an individual critical incident paper. So you might reflect on a particular incident at work in the context of, for example, a leadership challenge that you've come across or something that has gone wrong in your organization, let's say a change initiative. We have you look at that particular incident through organizational psychology frameworks, lenses, and theory to make sense out of the same and then derive action steps and recommendations. So here's an example from my leadership and well-being sessions. So you see some must-read articles there. Some tend to be very recent ones. Some tend to be very classical articles like the Drizhnevsky et al. Turn the job you have into the job you want article. In this particular case, students for this session would have to prepare, as I said, a job crafting exercise, which they would then bring to the class in order then to have that knowledge exchange in a peer coaching session and basically share their understanding of how they can turn the job that they currently have into the one that they want, that is more fulfilling, more, for example, compelling and purposeful. And then, as I said, we have students complete a discussion forum in advance. So as a leader, for example, how can you promote work engagement and well-being in the workplace? Students discuss this online, which is lovely to see. So there's a lot of engagement going on at the moment with the class that we've had so far this year. And there's a lot that I learned myself from going through those discussion forums and then bringing that basically to the live class, picking up on the different inputs that I would have received from the individual students, and then bringing that together in terms of their experience, best practices, and how research supports or does not support the same. And then, as I said, there's additional readings for those who can't get enough. Okay, so that's it from me in terms of giving you an overview of the particular course content, the course structure, assessments, and hopefully also the way you can benefit from the particular program. But as I said, rather than hearing from you, I'm sure you'd love to hear from someone who has actually been through that particular experience from the student perspective. And here we have the pleasure of listening to Michelle McDade. As I said, she is the founder of The Leading Place. So for those of you who might not have heard the introduction there, just to say that Michelle is a former student of the MSc in Work and Organizational Behaviour. She graduated last year, a star student of our program. She also runs, as I said, The Leading Place, which is a purpose-driven startup helping organizations reimagine leadership and build cultures where both people and performance thrive. And she has over 2 decades of experience in technology leadership, and she was an amazing candidate for this particular program. So, Michelle, thank you very much for being with us. And I'll stop sharing my slides here so that we can actually see you.
Thanks so much. I'm delighted to be here. I absolutely loved this program and I was thinking about it for many years and for many reasons I didn't prioritize it, but I found out about it 2 days before it was about to start, had a call with Isolde Freeney, signed up and I'm so pleased that I did. And I learned so much. It was life-changing. I met so many great people, loved all the lecturers, and also learned so much from the other students. You can't underestimate how important that is. And as you said, I've made some great friends. I'm still in touch with people, and that's great. Sandra Healy actually she's a former graduate, she was the one who talked to me about it beforehand. And when I was doing my thesis, she checked in with me and actually had a call with me to help me get my thoughts together, which was amazing. I'd also spoken to Siobhan Sweeney, who'd also done it before. So I spoke to a few people. I think that's really helpful to understand. I was a bit scared of the time commitment. I was in a really busy job. I was senior director of engineering at WorkHuman, and I thought, am I going to have time to do this? But happily, the universe conspired, and I was laid off. And I decided to set up my own business. And what more do you need? Only do a master's at the same time as setting up your own business. But it was so, so relevant to my business and all the stuff I was interested in. I think you can't underestimate there is a time commitment. There's a lot and you need to have supports like in your life to be able to get through it, I think. My husband and my two daughters, they're in their 20s, so they did a lot of I didn't do that much cooking, I would say. Um and they laughed at the end and said, "Are you going to actually get back to it?" Maybe. Um so definitely having supports is important. But one of the things that I think that got me through it was having balance as well and making sure that I didn't. So some people have said, "Oh, you're just going to have to cut off your friendship for 2 years." I'm not committed. I'm not willing to do that. And I think the people who do best in life generally have balance. So I was really quite intentional about making sure I went for beach walks and did cycles and did other stuff in my life to make sure I was staying well. I did find the academic reading hard at the start, and but we got so much help and encouragement. And I think one of the resources that really helped me was the library and the people who they'll do calls with you like on your academic writing and reading as well. So like there's a lot of great supports from that point of view. Neve Daly I'd call out as well. There was times where I thought I can't do this, and she talk me off a ledge. Um, I had over the years, I hadn't actually done a primary degree. I had at the time I left school, there was a recession, and I was doing business studies and left and joined the bank and studied at night, did a few courses, but hadn't actually done a degree. So I was really concerned about the academic writing. I'd done diplomas, but I just hadn't done something, a degree. But I had a lifelong learning. I was always doing courses and reading, and I thought, why not get a qualification for this? I'm doing all the reading anyway. What it really gave me is the importance of evidence-based research, really critical thinking, I think, which is so important with AI now that we hone those skills, and just also the high quality research. So they're things that I've brought with me, and in my like the work, all of the lectures were so interesting. I just found it like so relevant, and it was always seemed to be linking in with things that I was doing at the time. One of the things I'd done with one of my teams, we had looked at social networks as part of a product we were building. And then Claire Gubbin's class, practicing organizational psychology, kind of touched on that and went into more detail. So that was really interesting to me. Um, I think some of the things that stood out to me were some of the like I loved the VR experiences. I lo also loved the consulting practice. And it was such a learning, both from the stress of actually being in that situation. But one of my key learnings was how you can't give feedback in the moment when you're in survival mode. So I was asked afterwards, I'm really a fan of positive psychology, and I was asked, what did you do well? And I was like, I can't think of anything we did well. So that was such an aha moment for me, even to understand when people are in survival mode that you can't. Um, I also got a really interesting insight in Claire's class where she asked about what a career is. And I said to my table, well, I don't have a career anymore because I've got my own business. And they all started to laugh. And I was like, what? Like, but my corporate existence was all a very a framework, a career framework. And I was like, of course I have a career. But Claire laughed as well and kind of said, can I share this with the class? But it actually also helped me to see how sometimes you don't even know what you're thinking until you say it out loud. And actually, it was even through the conversations that you learn so much. Also, you kind of touched on it. There's such a diversity in the group. Some people were saying to me, "Oh my God, you've got so much experience," and I was saying, "Oh my God, you're really good at academic writing," And we between us were able to support each other. Um, and I would also call out Lisa because she was my thesis supervisor, and that woman is so patient and also so positive because one thing that I learned was we could submit 3 chapters by the date that was the deadline for submitting 3 chapters first for review. And I didn't really have them in a state that were good enough to send to anybody, but I just did it. And she came back and gave me great feedback and was really encouraging. And I guess one of the things that I found, like I run a workshop called Own Your Voice and Thrive, and it's all about trusting yourself and believing in yourself. But I many times thought, I can't do this. I don't think I'm going to get through it. And actually taking the supports and speaking to people about what you're struggling with really helps. And at the end, it just felt such an achievement to have gotten through it. The reading the papers, my big advice would be read them as early as you can. Start the writing as early as you can. With my dissertation, I changed my topic, which is like really not a great idea, but some people did do that. And then I ended up with a lot more to do with my lit review. But I learned through it all. I probably would say if you can at all, don't do that. Um, and also like the thing of my daughter kept saying, just write. Because I was just reading more, and she was like, just start writing. And, so done is better than perfect. I have a few learnings like that. Um, Trusting your inner knowing. Somebody I met at an event said to me, believe in your own work. And that really helped me. I actually kept it posted on the front of my notebook to remind me that that's okay, because I found the dissertation so interesting. I loved it. And my topic was how tech leaders build and maintain trusting relationships in remote and hybrid environments. And I found it hard. I just found it so interesting doing the interviews, but I found it really hard to bring it all together. And there is people who'll help you as well to get your thoughts in order. And I think that brought me through. I don't know if there's anything else that I have a few notes here of things. Um, so much of it is relevant to my role and to what I'm doing now. Things come to mind like every day that I learned as part of it. And even it would have been relevant to my previous role as well of leading tech teams. For the business, it's all the stuff that I'm interested in, human behavior in the workplace. It's like literally what I think about all the time. I just find it so interesting. Um, so it was really beneficial. I think really what I took away was the evidence-based learning, and the CIPD accreditation is great also to get that. Um, and just also I had such an interest in trust, and there's so many trust experts in DCU as well that really helped me to learn more. Um, yeah, I think the relationships with the lecturers, they're all so helpful and available to help you. I loved your class, Janine, and loved all of the topics in it. I think the leadership and gender is one of the topics I'm quite interested in anyway. I found that really great. And also the decision making and ethics. I found that all so you brought it to life. So in general, there's so much to learn, and yeah, gained so much from it.
Brilliant. Michelle, thanks so much for sharing your experience. And as I said, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the program, and great that you're still staying in touch. I think that's something I should mention as well. I have to say our alumni are really, really good in terms of coming back to DCU Business School, giving guest lectures, sharing their, insights, and maybe just even coming over for a cup of coffee. So it's really nice to, have that link
Yeah.
with our alumni community. Thanks so much. Do we have any questions for, Michelle or myself in terms of the program or the lived experience of the program? Okay, I think there's one question in the chat. So the first one is yes. So there is one question about the cost of the program. Yeah, it's 7,900 per annum. So I'll just put the link there in the chat in case you haven't seen it on the program webpage yet. There is a question about the recommended amount of study per week. I'll let Michelle speak in a moment, but just to say I would say it very much depends on you individually. So some students, for example, I would say who have less work experience and have quite recently graduated, for example, they're very much used to academic reading, which is a good bit of chunk of the preparation for each week. So for them, it's easy because they're used to academic reading, writing. So I'd say for them, it's quite something that they can quickly do and prepare for it. I'd say the reading is more challenging for someone who would have spent, let's say, 20 years in industry and now is coming back and they're used to short memos or maybe Harvard Business School articles, but now you have to really take a deep dive in terms of reading very complex review articles, maybe a meta-analysis or an empirical paper. And I'd say it takes a while to get your head around that. I'd say the other work in terms of preparation, it benefits you. Again, if you were to do something like, for example, a job crafting exercise, or if you were to do, you know, the life story exercise that Patrick and I would do, it's a self-reflection exercise, again, where some people spend more time on it than others, also depending on obviously the age that you're at. So if you're younger, obviously there's less to reflect on sometimes than when you're older. But Michelle, I don't know what you would say.
That's funny. Yeah, I've so much experience of um crazy stuff in the workplace that yeah, there's a lot to reflect on. But also it's a good practice to try and be able to do that more succinctly as well, you know. I would have dedicated most weekends to reading and doing work. But I would also get out for like a cliff walk or do something. During the week, I would do some bits of reading stuff, but I think it was mainly the weekends and then the Wednesday afternoons. Um, and then, you know, it's just catching up in between things, but it was all very relevant to what I was doing as well. So it wasn't, you know,
Mhm.
some of it paid off. I was kind of killing two birds with one stone. I hope that answers.
Also, feel free rather than putting it into chat, you're welcome to just unmute yourself and ask a question. Let me see, there were some other questions. What is the word count on the dissertation? I think it's still around 13,000 words, but we're talking maximum, right? Having to write that much is not necessarily something that has to be done. I'm always trying to stress to my students, you have to write in a way that you're basically touching on the relevant key authors, literature, and so on, leading up to your research question. You have clearly defined, for example, hypothesis, and so on. If you write a qualitative thesis, sometimes the word count might be simply higher because you have a lot of quotes, right, from your interviews that you include. So, again, it depends. Let me put it that way. Michelle, you wrote qualitative, right? A qualitative piece, didn't you? Yeah. So I'd say probably your dissertation was probably more on the longer end in terms of word count, I would assume.
Yeah, but I think I just there was a big division in the class about what your preference was, but I
Mm.
found that so interesting. I just wouldn't have been my head wouldn't be able to do quantitative. But I found it so interesting in interviewing people. And I think just one other thing, Neve introduced me to a student who was a year ahead and he was doing a similar topic and we have still stayed in touch and it was really helpful as well. So I really think you can't underestimate the whole social network and the support that's there.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm just putting another link in there if anyone has an interest with regards to the particular academic calendar and when the program usually runs. I'll just put the link in there. So the program would start in September, and courses usually run until the end of November. And then we would usually, and then there's obviously time for assignments in December and early January still. Then we would kick off quite early in January again, and normally sort of classes would run until sort of, you know, mid, early mid-April, roughly. Let me put it that way. And then again, you have roughly a good month where you're going to be busy basically writing your continuous assignments. And then basically we have grading period for us here, DCU, sort of business school staff, roughly at the end of April and beginning of May. So that's roughly in terms of the period of the classes being run. I have put the full link to the academic calendar just there in the chat in case you'd like to have a bit of understanding of the different types of timelines. In total, we have 12 weeks of classes. I should mention that. So we're talking 12 weeks. And then in the middle, there is a short break, which is usually week 7, which is called reading week, with the purpose that you're not taking the week off, but it's a week in order to catch up on your readings. So if you have struggled, for example, to read all of the relevant articles, or you want to do a little bit more reading, for example, knowing that you're going to write an assignment on a particular topic, that's the time to basically catch up on your readings. And also maybe already get started with some of the assignments in terms of thinking about, oh, if it's a critical incident paper, what could I write about? What could that look like in terms of maybe, a structure, and what content should need to go in there? What theories could touch on? What readings might be relevant in order to cover those theories, and so on.
I was
So
just to
that's
add as
the
well, year two, then your assignments are due like in April, and then the dissertation was due mid-June. And I think it's worth also taking a note of the deadline for final um submitting chapters to your thesis supervisor was sometime, like I think it was the 23rd of May or something like that. So having those dates in mind, I think, is important. And one thing I just wanted to add was my sister said to me at one point, I was getting a bit overwhelmed, and she said, "You've been waiting to do this for years." So mindset really matters. So to think about, actually, I'm going to enjoy this. I'm not just getting through it, I'm going to enjoy it. And that totally changed it for me when I actually went, I'm not overwhelmed. I'm just really enjoying all this learning. So that's helpful.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It's brilliant. So we have a few more questions there. Let me see, what are the entry requirements like? So the links that I put into the chat, the first one, what touch on that? So it says, I am from an education background. So if you don't have a level 8 honors degree in a psychology sort of study, H2, H2.1 or higher, you would then go for DC 957, which is the MSc in Work and Organizational Behavior. And here you can have basically any type of background. It doesn't have to be a business background. So again, you have to meet the H2.1 requirement ideally, but there is an option. We call this the recognition of prior learning route. If you do not meet the minimum requirement, you know, maybe it's a H2.2 or something like that, but you have a good bit of work experience or maybe other diplomas or something like that, then there is an option to go through the recognition of prior learning route, which means that you have to apply specifically with recognition of prior learning in the subject line of the cover letter. You would have to be making a case what it is that you would be bringing to the program beyond basically your undergraduate degree in terms of, as I said, additional learning, additional qualification, and work experience. And then that would be basically that application would be reviewed under the recognition of prior learning way pathway by the program chair and another person on the teaching faculty here. Through an interview, then we would be assessing that, and then the final decision rests with the Associate Dean of Teaching and Learning, just to flag that. It's also mentioned again on the website where you have the requirements basically outlined for the particular program. In terms of the intake number of students, I'd say on average, we're talking 35 students for the class, and it's usually a well-balanced mix between psychologists and non-psychologists. So those numbers have been quite steady for a number of years. And it's a good number in a sense in terms if you have a good group of individuals who are very diverse, as I said, in terms of roles, backgrounds, and so on in the class. But at the same time, it's not big or too big in a terms of, for example, not being able to speak enough in the classroom or running out of time because there's too many people in the classroom, and it provides you with a good network. I don't know, Michelle, if you want to add anything to that in terms of class numbers.
Yeah, like I think it's a big enough class, but you're in your group and you kind of form good relationships because you're doing projects together. And what I found was, there was one person in my group who didn't say too much in class, but always got us to think differently. So it's actually it's so important to value the diversity in the room.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. If you were to apply, it's hard to say how long exactly it is going to take. It depends on when you apply. So I'd say, for example, if you're applying quite late during the summer, so there are deadlines. So it's the 31st of July for any European Union, candidate applying, and it's the 1st of July for non-EU students. If you apply quite late, chances are that registry has to deal with a large volume of application, which means it's going to take them longer to process those, to scan them for applicants meeting the minimum requirements before they actually come onto my desk. And I have to then review them once registry sort of has done the first checks, and then it's going to go back to registry. So I'd say at minimum, yeah, don't really want to say a particular number, but I'd say it depending on when you apply. If you put it in rather sooner than later, I'd say chances are that you're going to hear back faster. Let me put it that way. How is AI changing work and org psychology as an applied discipline, both in terms of research and as practitioners? I'd say AI is having a massive impact on all work environments, and that includes academia, um, such that we are dealing quite a bit at the moment with AI within DCU Business Tool in terms of formulating an AI policy, in terms of getting our students and graduates AI ready. For example, Malcolm Brady is brilliant in terms of having introduced AI into his innovation organization and strategy module, and teaching students how to use AI, for example, to support them, for example, in terms of learning, knowledge development, and so on, but also teaching them how to be super cautious around it. Because as Michelle was saying, I think AI is a brilliant tool if you have critical thinking skills, if you are an expert already in your area and you can basically judge the output that AI produces. If you haven't developed those skills, I think using AI as a form of a shortcut can produce very poor results, misleading results. And that's what we're trying to teach our students as well. So to harness AI in a positive, supportive way, I think is something that we are aiming here in DCU Business School to teach our students, and we're harnessing it for ourselves as well, in a sense, as researchers, where AI can help you, for example, write statistical code, write program code to run, for example, complex analysis, or if you write the code yourself for AI, for example, to detect maybe a mistake or an error that you've made there. But as I said, you have to understand the basics of it in order then to leverage the benefits of AI. And I'm sure Michelle can also maybe speak to some of the relevance then once you're out there in industry working, and how that might combine nicely in terms of what you've learned in here as well as AI.
Yeah, I just put a note in the chat, but I think
Oh, fabulous.
in the
Thank you.
workplace you're expected to be able to use AI and to know, what's sensible use of it. So I think it's really important that you're doing the AI policy, but the reality is it's there. So we need people to be able to use it in a sensible way, and critical thinking is really important, and to make sure that you are doing your own work and you're not there's lots of research to show that you're wasting your brain power. Sometimes we get into nearly lazy patterns, so it's really important that we are doing our own thinking as well.
Brilliant. I'm conscious of time. If it's okay, in the interest of time, we are going to conclude the webinar here, but I'm still around for another 5 to 10 minutes if anyone has specific questions. So feel free still to stick around for another, 5 minutes, I'd say. Just to say upfront, a huge thank you to Michelle for joining today's webinars and for sharing her insights and input. I hope it's been beneficial to all of you. Feel free to follow up with me with any queries and questions that you may have. I'm not sure if my email is out there. I'll just put it into the chat there in case you don't have it. So drop me an email, follow up with me also via phone call if you prefer, and I hope to hear from you soon. So thanks everyone, and also to Sarah, Kira in the background for supporting this particular webinar. Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.